Shabbat Shalom, Good Shabbos. We'll begin services shortly. The Rabbi just concluded the early morning Torah study, so he'll be joining us real soon. We're glad you're here, and we look forward to a nice cyber davening this first day of May, May Day. Here's a personal story for those of you who are tuned in, kind of like a bonus episode, so to speak. May 1st is May Day. Growing up, I heard of May Day. Really didn't pay much attention to it. It's not a big deal, I don't believe, in the United States like it is in Europe. I really don't know the significance of the date in Europe, but I know it celebrates or commemorates the labor movement in Europe. On May 1st, 2010, it must have been 2011. My brother and I were in Berlin, being hosted by the Berlin Jewish Film Festival for a showing of The Ankles. And it screened that Saturday night. May 1st happened to be a Saturday, and it screened that evening, which was nice because, we were a featured film. Saturday night showing at a film festival is a big deal. It's prime time slot. And it was very kind of them. They took us to Berlin, and we had a chance to explore the city. Of course, we saw the Holocaust Memorial there and other monuments and sites. The film was well received. We did a little Q&A. I was impressed because I don't know if they had German subtitles on the film, but there was a nice crowd and they certainly understood it. And baseball is not it's really not a popular sport in Germany per se, but I just remember that. So it was literally about 9 years ago today, Shabbat, May 1st, that the film screened at the Berlin Jewish Film Festival. Anyway, a little anecdote for all you Yankees fans, a little personal history. While we're waiting for the rabbi to join us for the davening. And let me think. I do remember walking in the city that day, and there were large gatherings. And, we met other Jews, of course, in the city, one of who was pretty frum. I remember he invited me to his house for lunch. So I came. I met him and his wife, and they had a little child. So I had to walk back to my hotel or where I was, and he warned me. He said, "Be careful. It's I guess May Day could get a little what's the word? Agitated there in Berlin." Oh, also, for those of you who might have noticed, I'm doing my best Dale Schatz imitation. It's about as close as I get, I believe, with the bow tie. And now, without further ado, for your davening entertainment and enjoyment, here comes Rabbi Berman.
All right, settle down, everybody.
I gave everybody my best May Day story.
Yes, I heard some of it. It's big in Europe, and I think the communists used to use it as a.
Yeah, I know it celebrates like sort of the labor movement, the power of the proletariat or something, but I wasn't sure why the date had particular significance.
Oh, I don't know.
Bastille Day, I know they stormed the Bastille.
Right. And Cinco de Mayo celebrates the 5th of May.
Yeah. Here's a bit of trivia for all of you Beth Emet faithful. My advanced placement European history teacher was none other than Ruth Wilkoff. Ruth Wilkoff, everybody.
Yay.
And I did get a 5 on that exam when I took it my senior year of high school. That's the best you can do. So thank you, Ruth.
And so what do you remember from this class?
I remember a lot, but here's an interesting story. There was something called the Defenestration of Prague.
That's when they throw somebody out a window.
Yeah, they threw someone out a window. And the funny thing was, there was some kind of reference to it in an article, and I got a call from a friend of mine, who some of you might know, Eli Ben Shmuel.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, hey, Zev, you know what today is? I'm like, no. He goes, it's like 150th anniversary or something of the Defenestration of Prague. And how did he know that? Courtesy of Ruth Wilkoff. So there you go.
There you go.
You never know. I'm impressed you knew that.
Well, I learned it in 7th grade French, I think.
Oh, okay.
Because it's a French word.
I guess when someone gets tossed out a window and you're a kid or maybe a teenager, you tend to remember.
Yeah, it was just so unusual. There's a word for throwing somebody out the window.
Yeah. There must be a word for throwing a tomato at somebody, too. I just don't know it.
Yeah, right. Marinara, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have a very abbreviated little introductory session here. We had a nice little session of early Torah study, talking about all the excitement in the Parsha, and we will get back to that when we get to the Torah service. So, we're going to start on page 65 with the Birchot HaShachar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan l'sech v'vina להבחין בין יום ובין לילה. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשני בצלמו. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשני ישראל. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשני בן חורים. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasali kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten le'oev koach. Amen, amen, amen. And we will continue on page 72. The last 4 lines.
Tzadik Adamar
Yifrach
ki Eres
Balivanon
Yizgah Shitulim B'ved Adonai B'chatzrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yinuvun B'seiva Dishenim V'rananim Le'agid Ki Yashar Adonai Tavo.
And on page 81, a nod to Psalm 30. הפקת מספדי למחולי, פיתחת שקי ותעזרני שמחה, למען יזמך כבוד ולא ידום, אדוני אלוהי לעולם עודך. And we end the section with Mourner's Kaddish on page 82. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעולמה דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחיי חון וביומי חון וחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירון מיומה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. And if it's comfortable for you, I invite us all to rise, page 83 for Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Oseh v'reishit, Baruch Gomer v'yoseh, Baruch Gozer u'mekayim, Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch Mishalem al habirot, Baruch Mishalem Sachar Tov l'Reav, Baruch Chai La'ad V'Kayam Lanetzach, Baruch Podeh U'Matzil, Baruch Shemo. Yochid Chei Ha'olamim Melech Mishubachim For'adei Shemo HaGadol, Baruch atah Adonai melech mehulal batishbachot. And we're going to continue on page 85, down at the little square at the bottom. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu, Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. Okay, now we're going to continue on page 92. And we're going to take the 8th line from the bottom and go straight to the end.
Make it simple.
Sometimes you just have to. L'sichon melech ha'emori, ki li'olam chasdo, v'og melech ha'bashan, ki li'olam chasdo, v'natan artzam li'nachala, ki li'olam chasdo, nachala li'Yisrael, avdo, ki li'olam chasdo, שבשפלנו זכר לנו, כי לעולם חסדו, ויפרקנו מצערנו, כי לעולם חסדו, נותן לחם לכל בשר, כי לעולם חסדו, הודו לאל השמיים, כי לעולם חסדו. And we will continue on page 96 with the beginning of Ashrei. We'll read Ashrei silently, and then we'll pick it up out loud at the end. I'm going to go get this.
What?
This is too
cool, you mean? Yeah. Page 96. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Odye Halelucha Sehela Ashrei Yam Shekacha Lo Ashrei Yam Shadonai Eloha Tila Lidavi Hiramim Chala Babachash B'Chol Mebachol Tila Adonai da be'pi v'farel chabasar shem kodshol elam va'ed v'anachnu nivarech yaha me'ada ve'ad olam. Hallelujah. And we'll continue on the bottom of page 97 with really the last full sentence. Yimloch Adonai le'olam Elohai Zion Dor Vador, hallelujah. Okay. We're back on page 99.
99.
Yes, at the bottom. One of
Right.
our friends, as you like to call it, right?
Well, an old friend,
old
something we know from another milieu, another setting. Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, kim niskav shemo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem kerem liyamo, tila lecha chasidav, livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. And on page 100, in the middle, Hallelujah, 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 Bikocho, Hallelujah, Birkia Uzo, Hallelujah, Vigvurotav, Hallelujah, Kirov Gudlo, Hallelujah, B'teka Shofar, Hallelujah, B'neva V'chinor, Hallelujah, B'tofu Machol, Hallelujah, B'minim V'ugav, Hallelujah, V'tziltzulei Shama, Hallelujah, V'tziltzulei Trua, Kol HaNeshama, Hallelujah, 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 Kol HaNeshama, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. And on page 101, first paragraph, third line. L'chol Adonai hagedula v'hagevura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz l'chol Adonai hamamlacha v'haminaseh l'chol lerosh. And we're going to continue on page 104. The top of the middle section. Ilufinu male shira, shira kayamu, shonenu rina kamon galav. Ilufinu male shira kayam shonenu rina kamon galav. Ilufinu male shira kayamu shonenu rina kamon galav. Kamongala. And we'll continue on page 105, 3 lines from the bottom of the first paragraph at the little square. Nehalecha unshabechecha unefarechecha unevarechem unefarecha unevarechem kochecha kamor David barchi nafshi et Adonai v'kol karovai et shem kodsho. Ha'el b'tazumot uzecha, ha'gadol b'kvod shemecha, ha'gibor l'netzach v'hanora b'norotecha, ha'melech ha'yoshev al kisei ram v'nisa. Third paragraph, Shochenad.
Shochenad marav v'kadosh shemo.
Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo.
V'chatuv ranenu tzadikim Adonai, V'sharim navatila, v'sharim nidala, v'divrei tzadikim nidbarach, v'vilashon chasedim nidrama, v'kelev kedoshim tikadash, v'machalot v'vivot al-chavit Yisrael. Li'odol al-shabeach, the fellow of Mahim, the Hadel, the Barekla, the Kales, Agodi Behishi, of the Ishbechot, David Ben Izai, of the Chamishichecha.
We are invited to rise, page 106, Yishtabach.
Yishtabach, Simcha, Lad, Makin, the Melch of the Rightman, Birachat v'odot me'adav yadolam Baruch Adonai
Baruch Shemo.
El melech v'adish b'chad El ahodot Adonai nivlot Abachel v'zivri zimra melech el chei olami.
Amen.
Yidgadav Shemir Rabah
Amen.
Yolabahad Grach Rahut Hevi Amelech Malchutei
V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayedecho beit Yisrael Bagala bagala v'lizman kariv Amen. Yeheshmei Rabba mevorach Yolam lo me'omaya yitbarach
Yitbarach v'ishtabach V'yitbar v'nasle v'yithadar v'yithale v'yithala Shemede Gudejah
Brichu
V'yila mikol birlachata v'shirata
Tushbechata v'nechemata Damiram yoma Amen. We remain standing for the Baruch Hu, the call to prayer, page 107.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Amvorach Leolam Va'ed.
Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
You may be seated. Please join me at the beginning of the first of 2 blessings before the Shema. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzei ha'or vorei choshech oseh shalom vorei et hakol. And we continue to the bottom of the page on our own.
In Kekechavin Zuladechavis Bildechaha Midomelach Ekekechadonai Eloheinu Olam Hazel Vin Zuladcha Malkin L'Cheolam Haba Eves B'Dacha Goalin Limot HaMashiach Vin Domelech HaMashiach L'Chiyat HaMiti.
Page 108, El Adon.
El Adon Kol HaMasim Baruch Mevorach V'Vigon Neshama Galo V'Tuvo Malei Olam Dad Devuna Sovevi Moto Hamid Gael Chayot HaKodesh V'nei Darchavol HaMekava V'chodom Yishor Lifnei Chizo Chesed B'Rachamim Lifnei Chivodo Tovim me'orot shebara Eloheinu yitzaram b'dad B'bina uvaskel Koach gvura natan bahem Ve'od moslim b'kerev tevel B'leim leim mefikim noga Na'eziva mekol ha'olam Semechim b'tzeitam b'sasim b'voam Ozim b'yeim aritzon kanam Pierre Bechavot, no nivelishmo, Zala Verina, Zecher Machuto, Karal Hashem Ezrayiz Rachor, Vavikin Surat Halvana, Shevach no nimlo, Kodivah Marom, Tiferet Bogidula, Svavim Afarim V'chayot HaKodesh.
Page 109, we read the top two paragraphs on our own.
La Elai Sheher Shava Mikol HaMasim V'mashvit La V'ashva Kis Gibra.
We're on page 110.
ומפארים אמיצים, ומקדישים, ומחמליכים,
את שם האל המלך הגדול, הגיבור הנורא הקדוש הוא, וכולם מקבלים עליהם, זה מזה ונמשזה.
בינה חדובה, צפה ובנימה, קידוש הקלם, כי אחד עונים ימים בירה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלך הארץ גדולו. Vafarim echayot ha'kodesh brash gado Minasim v'matzravim V'madam shabachim b'yomrim Baruch kivod Adonai b'mkomo Ve'abrach mevzin v'chavang mezur Urchadas hatzion da'ir V'nizgeh kulanu meira le'oro Urchadas hatzion da'ir V'nizgeh kulanu meira le'oro Baruch atah Adonai
Baruch Shemo.
Yotzer ha'me'orot.
Amen. Page 111, our second blessing before the Shema, talks about our relationship with God.
Adonai Eloheinu Melech Gdolah v'tzedakah Chamad Aleinu Avinu Malkeinu B'gvura v'odinu Shebaruchu v'cha Avinu Malkeinu V'tilam chukei chayim K'niraniinu lamedeinu Avinu v'rachamim Rachim rachim aleinu V'tein b'libeinu le'avin V'avinu l'haskil lishma V'limod l'lamed V'shmor v'lasod U'likayim et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha B'ahava V'ha'erinenu b'Toratecha v'na'avek libeinu b'mitzvotecha,
v'yachid livavenu,
v'yachavav l'ira et shemecha, v'na'onevo li'olam va'ed, v'na'onevo li'olam va'ed,
ki v'shem
kodshecha, Hagadol hanora b'adanu, nagila, v'nismecha, nagila, v'nismecha v'yeshuatecha. V'avinu v'shalom,
Tzitzit.
me'ariba ganivu daretz, v'tolicheinu, kol mimehu, v'yartzeinu, ki helebo el-yeshudada, uvahanu v'acharida mikol aviladam, v'gira v'danu, v'shimcha gadol, selah, be'emet, lihodolecha, v'liachedecha, be'ahava. Baruch Adonai,
Shemo.
Abachir b'yamo Yisrael, b'yahava.
Amen. 112.
Shema
Yisrael,
Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'yahavetahoid Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha, v'chol meodecha, v'hayu hadivarim ha'ile, asher anochi mitzavecha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinadam levanecha v'dibarta bam, v'shivdecha b'veitecha, v'lechtecha b'derech, v'shochbecha v'vikulmecha, v'shartam le'hodal yadecha, v'yilet hod b'ninecha, v'chedavidam amzot beitecha, v'visharecha.
And the next two paragraphs very quietly. Shemo, Shemo. Jesus Christ.
Adonai Elohechem, Emet,
V'yatziv
nachom
nachom.
yom v'yasher nachom. V'yidovadahu ke'acham l'shmo ke'acham v'chisonacho l'machuto v'emunato le'had kayamet.
You may release the tzitzit.
Ma'akeinu melech avodeinu goleinu goel avodeinu tzveinu tzveishoadeinu vodeinu matzileinu melam shemecha einu leim zulatecha
114.
Ez avodeinu atahu me'olam makin moshev livnei rachim v'chodoch v'badu malam shabbat. Emet, 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 atahu rishon.
Emet, 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 emet,
atahu acharon. Uvi baladecha ilanu melech, melech goelu Moshiach. Uvi baladecha ilanu melech, melech goelu Moshiach.
Mimitzrayim galtanu.
Mitzrayim galtanu. Tila lelelyo, Baruch mevarach, Moshe b'nei Yisrael, Achanu shirah, B'simcha rabba v'amru chulam.
I invite you to rise, Michamocha.
Michamocha
Ba'elim
ba'elim Adonai,
Michamocha nedar b'kodesh,
Noradi lo,
Osef elef.
Shira chadasha shebechul galim l'shimcha zvadayam, Yachad kulam hadovim lichu v'yamrel, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. So Israel, Kulma be'advat Israel, Udichnumecha, Hilchot of Israel, Go Aleinu, Adonai Tzva'ot Shemo Kidosh, Israel Baruch Adonai, Go Israel.
The Amidah this morning is said silently and standing from page 115, A or B, and then we skip page 116 and continue page 117 to 120. It's a silent Amidah, silent prayer. You can add whatever's on the page, whatever's in your heart to whatever's on the page. Okay. The reader's repetition of the Amidah will begin on page 115A. You may remain seated until we get to page 116 for the Kedusha, and then we'll invite you to rise.
Baruch atah
Baruch
Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elokei Avoteinu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, El HaGadol HaGibor v'Echad Nora El Elyon, Gomel Chazadim Tovim v'Gonei HaGol, V'dacher Chasdei Avot, V'Mevi Goel Livnei V'neim, Liban Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Moshe U'Magin, Baruch atah Adonai, Magin Avraham,
Amen.
Adonai Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Melchei Beitim Adar Rav Hoshia, Malarin Adam, Mechagel Chaim Bechesed, Bechayim Eidim Berachamim Rabim, Samech Anachim Ve'alvei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayim, Emunadoli, Shenei Afar, Michamocha Bagivro, Umira Melach, Melach Memit, Umechayah, Umashmiach Yeshua, V'nemanadalachayot Medim, Baruch Adonai, Mechei HaMetim.
We rise, page 116.
Nikadish et Shimcha ba'olam, Gishem le'magdishim odo b'shmei maharav, Kagaru b'yad nevi'echa, V'gara zel zeh ve'amar, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzebaot, Melech haaretz kivodo. Ahaz v'gor, ahaz gadol, Hare v'chazak mashvimcha, Midnasim le'umat zirafim, Le'umadam baruch yomehiru, Baruch kivod Adonai b'imkomo. B'imkomecha makinu, Makinu Davia, B'imkomecha makinu, B'imkomecha makinu Davia, V'tim loch aleinu, V'tim loch aleinu, V'tim loch aleinu, V'tim loch aleinu, Ki mechagim, Ki mechagim, Anachnu lach. Madai loch b'tzion, Madai loch b'tzion, B'kal b'yamenu, B'kal b'yamenu, L'olam ha'et is gone. Tigadash, v'tigadash, Tidgadash, Tidgadash, B'toch Yerushalayim, B'toch Yerushalayim ircha, V'dor v'ador, L'neizach nitzachim, V'eineinu tirena malchutecha, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Zion, V'dor v'ador, Hallelujah. V'dor v'adonai gidgolecha, V'netzcha nitzach v'nishalecha nagdish, V'shivkacha ohen mipinam v'shalam b'hen, Ki hamelech l'vakadosh, Adon, Baruch Adonai,
Baruch Hu Shemo.
Hail HaKadosh.
You may be seated. We're on page 117.
Yismach Moshe b'matnat Che'al K'even Ne'eman Gar Atalo K'lil Tiveret B'roshon Adada B'yamna Levarecha Al Har Sinai U'shnei Luchot Avanim Horid B'yado V'chaduf Bahem Shemirat Shabbat Chaduf Bahem Shemirat Shabbat V'chaduf Bahem Shemirat Shabbat V'chigatu B'toratecha V'shamru V'nei Yisrael Et HaShabbat L'asot et HaShabbat Radam Berit Olam Beini Uvein B'nei Yisrael Oti Le'olam B'nei Uvein B'nei Yisrael Oti Le'olam Sheished Yamim Asa Adonai Et HaShamayim V'et Haaretz V'yom HaShvi Shabbat Vayi Navash V'yom HaShvi Shabbat Vayi Navash V'lo nidad Adonai Eloheinu G'yat Eloheinu Chal Kin L'Dei V'Zilim V'gam Nochadosh Kin V'Rehilim Kil Yisrael Amcha Nidata B'Hava L'Israel Yaakov Asher B'Bacharta Hamikadosh Yeshvi Kulam Yizbevid Adol Mituvecha V'Asher Yatzita Bo V'Kidosh Do Chebad Yamim Ha'Takarata Zecher L'Ma'aseh V'Reishit Eloheinu V'Elohei Avoteinu V'Tzevimnu Chadeinu Kadeshenu B'mitzvotecha V'tein Chelkeinu B'Toratecha Sabeinu Mitzuvecha V'samcheinu B'Shuvatecha V'ta'ir Libeinu Li'yodecha Beth Emet V'hanchilenu Adonai Eloheinu V'Yehovah U'V'Razah Shabbat Kodechecha V'Yanuchova Yisrael V'Kadesh Shemecha Baruch Atah Adonai V'Kadesh HaShabbat.
Page 118.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu B'Amcha Yisrael V'Neviladaha
L'Hashem
V'Eloheinu Dalil V'Betecha Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu B'Amcha Yisrael V'Neviladaha
L'Hashem
V'Eloheinu Dalil V'Betecha U'Tefilatam V'Yavadego B'Beratzon U'Tefilatan Damid Avodat Yisrael Lamecha U'Tefilatam V'Yavadego B'Beratzon U'Tefilatan Damid Avodat Yisrael Lamecha Ritzei V'Techezena Heineinu B'Shuvcha L'Tzion Rachamim Baruch Atah Adonai Hamachal Shechinata L'Tzion
Amen.
Modim Anachnu Atav Kilachal Rachamecha V'Merachim Kilod HaMachasadecha Melacham Givinu La
Middle of page 119.
V'Yahu Gulamid Brach V'Tamam Shimcha Makin Lamid Le'olam V'Ed V'Chol HaChaim Yodu Chazela V'Halu Et Shimcha B'Emet Ha'el Yishuateinu V'Ezrateinu L'Sela Baruch Atah Adonai
Baruch V'Baruch Shemo.
Hadosem Chalachal Eliodot
Amen.
Elohim Elohei Avoteinu Ba'achim V'Bracha HaMishlesh B'Torah Dividing Moshe Avdecha Ha'amul Rabbi Piaron Uvanav Kohanim Abgidoshecha Gamur Yivarechecha Adonai V'Yishmerecha
Keni Ratzon.
Yair Adonai Banav V'Elecha V'Chuneka
Keni Ratzon.
Yisa Adonai Banav V'Elecha V'Yazehim Lecha Shalom
Ken Yehi Ratzon. Page 120.
Sim Shalom
Tova uvracha ba'olam hein v'chesed v'rachamim v'rachamim aleinu
V'alko Yisrael,
V'alko Yisrael Amecha,
V'achenu Avinu Kulanu Kiechad, V'yorbanecha, V'yorbanecha Natata Lanu, Adonai Eloheinu, Sim Shalom, Tova
Uvracha ba'olam chen v'chesed v'rachamim v'rachamim aleinu.
V'alko Yisrael,
V'alko Yisrael Amecha, v'ahavat chesed v'ahavat chesed, v'racha v'rachamim v'chaim v'shalom, sim shalom.
Tova
Uvracha ba'olam chen
v'chesed v'rachamim v'rachamim aleinu. V'alko Yisrael, V'alko Yisrael Amecha, V'dav b'necha livarech, Et Amcha Yisrael, V'chal v'chosha, B'shlomecha, Sim shalom, Tova
Uvracha ba'olam chen v'chesed v'rachamim
v'rachamim aleinu. V'alko Yisrael, V'alko Yisrael Amecha, Baruch Adonai,
Baruch v'ruk shemo.
V'yivarech Adonai Yisrael b'shalom.
Amen. We now continue in order to end Shachari with Kaddish Shalem on page 138.
Yigrav Shemi Rabbah.
Amen.
V'almadi v'achru dev v'amlich v'achru v'chaychon v'mechon v'chayach v'bein Yisrael. V'aglav izman kariv v'yimeru.
Amen. Yesh me Rabba mevorach,
V'yolam
Lo
alam
me'almaya.
me'almaya. Yidbarach. Yidbrav ishtabach. Yidbrav yidrom anaseh. V'dav yidam v'dal shevei kodesha.
Brichu.
Eila min kol berachah dav shivada. Tishbachah dav v'nechvata. Amirom v'dam v'yimeru.
Amen.
Tid gav tzodon v'odon nechol Yisrael. Kod avahon ishmaya v'yimeru.
Amen.
Yesh lav alav min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yimeru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom birmamav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen.
Shkoich.
Brachti.
We continue now with the Torah service on page 139. You may remain standing until the ark is open. And you may remain seated until the ark is open.
I guess you can do both.
Yeah, in our house, you either stand or sit.
Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai v'ein k'maasecha malechudecha malechut kol olamim u'memshadecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimlach, le'olam ha'olam, Adonai os v'yamo yitin, Adonai yivarech, et amo v'shalom. Avarach aviv, hitiv avir tzonecha, et Zion. Tivnecha omod, Yerushalayim. Tivnecha omod, Yerushalayim. Kivicha livad vadachnu, melech eram v'nizah adar olamim. Vayivi Sahara, vayamer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, v'yafusu oyevecha, v'yadusu
continue on page 140, second paragraph, Be'anarachetz. Well, a number of interesting things have happened this week in the history of the Jewish people. Let's take a look at some of them, shall we? On April the 25th, 1979, it was a big day, the Israel-Egypt peace treaty took effect, leading to a wonderful little Cold War that's just, it's so nice not to be actually fighting with the Egyptians.
And it also led to a lot of tourism.
Oh, yeah. No, Israelis like to go to Mount Sinai for Passover.
Yeah.
It's
It's
great.
almost like a rite of passage to go to Mount Sinai and walk up those steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that they actually know which mountain is Mount Sinai, but
But that doesn't stop you from getting your I walked Mount Sinai t-shirt.
right. I went all the way to Mount Sinai. All I got was this lousy T-shirt.
Right.
It's sort of like I went on a certain Christmas Eve. Chaya took me to Beit Sahor in the territories, and there they have not one, not two, but 3 shepherds' fields where the stars were supposed to have been seen that led the way for the 3 wise kings to come in to Bethlehem. And but there's 3 of them because we're not sure which, they're not sure exactly. Some people think it's this one, some people think it's that one.
That is like the perfect recipe for a made-for-Christmas TV special.
Yeah,
Three
I think
Shepherds Fields, like a comedy or something.
Yeah, right. 3 Shepherds Field. Yeah, it's a Hallmark movie.
Yeah. I could see it. It's like, or they're saying like, a Christmas field, that's a nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, you think that's a Shepherd's Field. Now, on April 26, 1655, this is the day that the Jews were permitted to settle in New Amsterdam. Now, Peter Stuyvesant had been trying to keep these new Jewish people that had come all the way from Brazil, I believe.
Yeah.
And like there's 23 of them or something, and they land, and he doesn't want these Jews to come into his city of New Amsterdam. So he writes a note saying to the Dutch Indies Company, saying, is it okay for me to just sort of like get rid of these Jewish people? And he doesn't realize that on the board of the Dutch Indies Company are a few Jews. And he gets a letter back saying, you let them settle.
Yeah. Or maybe you'll be out of the New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam is a very interesting colony. I heard a podcast on it because originally it was settled with people like debtors and
Yeah.
trying to get away.
Like Australia.
Yeah, it was like
Debtor's prison and things like that.
Yeah. But it grew up in spite of Peter Stuyvesant to be a place where, at least for the colonies, it was a very tolerant type of place.
Yeah,
And this idea of,
eventually,
like,
yeah.
liberty and religious tolerance and so on.
Yeah. Well, that happens when you get people of different cultures living in close quarters to each other.
Right.
The more you know somebody else, the less you think of them as the other. He's just not, now he's just your neighbor.
So the idea of a sort of American tolerance or like the melting pot was kind of fostered in a way there, so early on in
Yeah,
our history.
yeah. And to this, even to today, New York remains a center of cultures being melted together.
Right.
Yeah. I kind of miss New York. April the 27th, 1932. Now, I don't even know who this person is. It's an actress. Her name is Anouk Aimee. And she was born in 1932. And apparently she was Jewish, but I can't, it would have been nice if they said starring in Chaplin's, or,
Was she a silent?
Gold.
Couldn't have been a silent film star. So
She was born in 32, so by the time, no, couldn't have,
talking
no.
for sure.
We're past that, yeah. And
maybe her
then,
mother knew the publisher of that book or something.
yeah, right. Nepotism strikes again, raises its ugly head. On April the 28th, 1881, it was a pogrom. I'm not going to go into that. April 29th, 1938, the actor Elliot Gould was born. I'm sure when this book was published, he was a little bit more popular than he is now, but nonetheless, he had a number of great roles.
Yeah.
I liked him in MASH, particularly in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he was married to Barbra Streisand for a while.
Yeah, my daughter told me that they met actually on some Broadway production.
Yeah, that makes
He
sense.
was supposed to be the star, and she was supposed to be like, a bit player, but she stole the show or something like that.
Yeah, no, she's a Steensealer. But her birthday was just a few days ago, April 24th.
Yeah.
She was, so Elliot Gould was 1938, and she was 1942. It's respectable. And on the 30th of April, not a good thing, a royal proclamation instructs Jews to leave Spain by the end of July in 1492. Now, you might remember a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned on March 31st, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella signed the order expelling the Jews from Spain. So it took them until April the 30th to actually get the instructions out to the Jews. They did not have the instantaneous communications that we have today. Matter of fact, those are relatively new, those things we have today. So that was not an unreasonable amount of time. Of course, it was an unreasonable request. That was not a good thing. And May Day, May the 1st, 1914, the Mizrahi Organization of America was founded. So for the Sephardi Jews of America, I guess. All right. Next week we have a bunch of birthdays and things, but we'll have to wait on those. Okay. Now, the Parsha today is Emor. I'm going to repeat the bad joke I made earlier in Torah study. There are 3 Parshaot in a row. Achremot, which means after the death of, and it happens to be the death of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu. The next Parsha is Kedoshim, holy things. You should be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. And Emor, talk to the people of Israel. So the Midrash, the modern Midrash on that is Achremot, Kedoshim, Emor. After you're dead, they say nice things about you. Which is only proper. But we see a lot of things about priests and holiness in this week's foray into yesteryear. And then at the end of the Parsha, in the part we're not reading today, there's a story, a break in the Levitical priestly code for some action. It's the story of a man who had an Egyptian father, and his mother was from the tribe of Dan. He got into a fight with a full-blooded Israelite, and the man with the Egyptian father did something most of us have done at one time or another, some of us more than others, a few less. He said something he shouldn't have. He used God's name, cursing the other man. Well, the technical term for this is blasphemy, and the punishment, we find out after Moses inquires of God, is severe. Okay, it's death. Now, the penalties lately have not been as severe for blasphemy, but it has been a crime on the books until fairly recently. I looked at the Wikipedia article on blasphemy law, and it's all over the world. all over the world. There are, just to name a few countries, Afghanistan, Algeria, Australia. Well, Australia, I think, got rid of theirs finally. Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, Jordan, Kuwait, Malaysia, Nigeria, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom, which only got rid of their blasphemy laws in 2008. The United States still has a few blasphemy laws on the books. No federal laws, but there's a few state laws that are still, if not enforced, still in the books. And, well, poor
I don't
little...
see how that could be enforced here, First Amendment.
Well, that's not how they saw it. You have the right to say anything you want, except you can't, I'll get into some of the details about that.
Yeah.
So in the United States, there's a number of states, as I mentioned, that still have blasphemy rules on the books. Massachusetts, Michigan, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Wyoming, and Pennsylvania. Some have blasphemy laws on the books from the founding days. Chapter 272 of the Massachusetts General Law is a provision based on a similar colonial era Massachusetts Bay statute enacted in 1697 states. Now, in the section 36, you should know that the word contumelious means insulting or contemptuous. And you need to know that here. It says, the law says, whoever willfully blasphemes the holy name of God by denying, cursing, or contumeliously reproaching God, his creation, government, or final judging of the world, or by cursing or contumeliously reproaching, and here they mention the founder of Christianity by name, or the Holy Ghost, so they got the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, or by cursing or contumeliously, I'm going to master this word, reproaching or exposing to contempt and ridicule the holy word of God contained in the Holy Scriptures, shall be punished by imprisonment and jail for not more than 1 year, or by a fine of not more than $300. And may also be bound to good behavior. Now that's $300 in 1697 money. You can't afford that. I figured Jeff Bezos could blaspheme, you know.
Sounds like it was like a barrel of laughs in Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah. Gosh darn it.
Exactly.
But that's where those things came into being. Cheese and crackers.
Yeah.
Gosh darn it, the heck. In Maryland, the history of the blasphemy laws, they seem to indicate that even into the 1930s, the First Amendment was not recognized as preventing states from passing these laws. In an 1879 codification of Maryland's statutes prohibited blasphemy. You could be hauled off. Now, true, times seem to have changed a bit. I think that if these laws were enforced today, we might have a more civil society, but if the penalty was still as harsh as it was back in the Torah, or even 1697 Massachusetts, most of us would be in trouble, and that means you. I'm awfully glad we have the First Amendment, and something we can stand behind. But the main point today is that this transgression is not one that takes money or property from another individual or causes somebody else bodily harm. The best case one can make for blasphemy laws is they're a reflection of character. And I think that's the example that we see here in the Torah. But why bring up the fact that the blasphemer's father was Egyptian? I mean, why pick on him for that? It sounds xenophobic at best and racist at worst, things that are common issues today. Well, I must tell you that what I have found over the years of studying these texts is that the ancient rabbis were at least as troubled as I am over many of the less PC parts of the tradition. So when they saw something that might be a problem, they addressed it. Like the law we saw about the wayward and rebellious child who doesn't heed the word of the mother or the father, and the penalty is death. But the rabbis put so many restrictions on just how wayward and rebellious the child had to be to both the father and the mother at the same time, and to what degree. No one was ever executed for the crime of being a wayward and rebellious child. But it's still in the Torah, it's on the books. So here we have the problem that we have to decipher. Are all children of Egyptian fathers to be forever suspect of bad behavior? After all, there was a sizable contingent of Egyptians who left Egypt with our ancestors because they witnessed God's might and saw that the Israelite culture offered a better life. And they were not excluded. No one said, oh, you're Egyptian, you can't come. There were no Jim Crow laws or Hopni-Ramses laws, I think they called them back then.
What were they called?
Hopni-Ramses laws. In fact, just the opposite occurred. It says at least 36 times in the Torah, it tells us not to abuse the stranger because, and the reason that's given is quite clear. It's because we were strangers in Egypt, so we should know what it feels like, and we should never do that to anybody else, to another people, to any individuals who join us. We should just never, ever do that again. From a personal point of view, I have to assume that these prejudices that people have, and you see them all the time on the news and everything, about immigrants, and I have to assume my own children, having had the good fortune of being born in Guatemala, could possibly be victims of this kind of profiling. You're not from here, are you? Yeah, I was born here. That's not my kids, but you know, lots of people who look like Hispanic or African were born. Most of them were born right here. This is their country. Where do you want them to go back to? Dina was very tuned in. This is an old story, and I know I've told it before, but Dina, Eitan, and I were detained by Homeland Security for over 2 hours in Detroit when we first got to the United States for my first job in the United States in Ohio. And they basically told me, we're investigating you because your children don't look like you. And I had adoption papers from Guatemala and everything, and you would think that immigration and Homeland Security would have somebody who could read Spanish, but no. They detained us for a few hours, and then they finally let us go. And on the way back to the town, somebody said, well, why did they do that? And Dina said, we were detained because Abba's white and we're brown. She didn't miss it. So I have to look at the story here in Leviticus and say, is the Torah telling me the people of the Egyptian descent are genetically predisposed to blasphemy and other shortcomings? Or is there something else going on here? And to the rescue, the rabbis of the Midrash seemed to think that there was something else going on here. They said that this particular Egyptian, not all Egyptians, but this particular Egyptian had a background. And they tell the story that this particular Egyptian was the son of the taskmaster in charge over several Israelite foremen of slaves. Each foreman was in charge of 10 workers. And this Egyptian father came to a foreman's house early in the morning and said, go gather your 10 workers. And while in the foreman's house, the foreman's wife smiled at him, and when the foreman left, he misconducted himself with her. He took advantage of his position of power. And the foreman, the woman's husband, came back and saw the taskmaster leaving. He knew what had happened, and the taskmaster had authority. The foreman was still an Israelite slave. It was an imbalance of power, and what could be done? So the taskmaster beat the foreman relentlessly all day, meaning to kill him. And that's when Moses saw the taskmaster and this other person. He was whipping or beating the Israelite. And that's when a love of his fellow Israelites and a cry for justice moved Moses to kill the taskmaster. But a little bit late here, this Israelite woman conceived and gave birth, and our blasphemer today is the product of that misconduct. So we see that the rabbis make it clear that the Egyptian father was not one of the Erev Rav who joined the Hebrews. And not only was it just this particular Egyptian who was the problem, we see that the mother now had the problem of having a child that was not her husband's. And the Midrash describes these social issues as well as that led the child growing up to be a blasphemer. Moses asks God what to do with the man. God spells out the punishment, but as is usual in the cases where Moses asks a legal point, God also speaks to the larger issue. All blasphemers, whether they're Israelite or resident alien, are to be judged by the same law. This is the part that we went over in early Torah study today. The Torah takes race out of the equation. The Ger and the Ezrach, the Erev Rav and the Levite are all to be judged exactly the same by their action. Action is the only criteria by which the people are judged. And the Torah makes no generalizations. It doesn't say when you pull over a person because you suspect they might have been boiling a calf in its mother's milk, you have to ask for identity papyrus. It doesn't say you have to do that. It doesn't say that all children of Egyptian lineage are suspect. We're not to be judged, says the Torah, for the sins of our parents, not of our children, and all the comments, we're not to be judged by the sins of people who came before us or our kids. And the Torah continues to make the point that we're each responsible for our own actions, and that we're supposed to take care of each other because we're still all in this together. And why find things that tear us apart? Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Okay, now, we are in the second triennial cycle. We're going to start on page 722, and what happens in the Parsha before we get to our reading today, we start with some laws that govern what is permitted to a priest, a Kohen, to do. You may know that traditionally someone who's a Kohen doesn't go into a cemetery. This is where that gets spelled out. The Kohen can only go to the funeral of 7 closest relatives, parents, child, sibling, or spouse. They're not allowed to shave their heads the way that local priests do. It's a matter of no one mistaking one of our priests for one of their priests. They can only marry a woman who has not been married before. The high priest has even additional restrictions. He can't go to anybody's funeral. There are physical conditions which would render a priest unfit for performing the sacrificial service, as it would distract from the holiness of the event. And the Talmud will go on to clarify this is only where one is not well known. Even a hunchback with a limp and a misshapen hand can perform the sacrifices if everybody knows him and they're not distracted by his appearance. They must also be careful of their state of purity in accepting the tithes that the people bring for their sustenance. What the priest and his family members can eat is also spelled out before we begin. So we're beginning on page 722, chapter 22, verse 17. The first aliyah tells us that all offerings brought to the tabernacle or in the temple later on must be perfect, free of blemish. So let's turn to that, 722, verse 17.
V'el kol b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem ish ish m'beit Yisrael v'nager b'Yisrael asher yakriv korbano l'chol nidrehem l'chol nidvodam asher yakrivu l'Adonai lola l'irtzonechem tamid zachar b'bakar b'kavasim v'izim kol asher b'mum lo takrivo ki lo l'ratzon yeh lachem.
The next reading is also on page 722, verse 21. It's more of the acceptability of imperfect animals for sacrifice in places where a Hebrew cannot. In places where a Hebrew cannot bring a blemished beast, a Gentile cannot bring one either. What it tells us that there were non-Jews who made sacrifices. So non-Jews came to the temple. It says so in the Torah. Page 722, verse 21.
Veish ki akriv zevach shlamim ladonai lefalei neder lelihim dava babakar ulbatzon tamim hiyeh leratzon komum lo hiyeh bo averet o javor o charutz o yabelet o garav o yalefer lo takrivu ele ladonai veishe lo tinu mehem al hamizbeach ladonai v'shor varseh Sarua v'kalut nedava dase oto u'neder lo yiradze u'ma'uch v'chatu v'natuk v'charut lo takrivu l'Adonai v'artzichem lo ta'asu miad ben nechar lo takrivu elechem Elohechem mikol eleh ki moshchatam bahem muhum baham lo yiradzu lachem.
We continue on page 723, verse 26. An animal may not be sacrificed until it's at least 8 days old. No animal is to be slaughtered at the same time as its young. And this is supposed to teach us compassion. And I'll ask you to read the comment at the bottom of 723 about verses 27 and 28. It says when you sacrifice a Thanksgiving offering, you have to eat it all on the same day with no leftovers.
Vidaber Adonai al Moshe lemor shor hachesed v'oez ki v'alid v'yashivat yamim tachat imo mi'yom hashmini v'hala yiratzeh lekorbani shel Adonai v'shor oseh oto v'et beno lo tishchatu b'yom echad v'chidis b'chu zevach Torah al Adonai l'irtzotchem tizbachu v'yom ahuli achel lo totiru mimenu ad boker ani Adonai u'shmartem mitzvotai v'asitem otam ani Adonai Lo techalalu ad shem kodshi v'nikdashti b'doch b'nei Yisrael ani Adonai mekadishchem hamotzi etchem eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem Elohim ani Adonai. And let me mention that this is also the Torah reading we read usually on the second day of Chag or on the day of Chag.
Right.
So it's very familiar.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's familiar to everyone. So the next aliyah starts on page 724 with the beginning of chapter 23. And we deviate from these priestly and sacrificial rules for a moment to consider the calendar of sacred times. In this aliyah, we see that the Sabbath, Shabbat, is the singularly most important of all the holidays. That's 724, verse 1.
Vidaber Adonai al Moshe lemor daber el b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem moadei Adonai asher tikru otam mikrai kodesh Elahim moadai sheshed yamim te'aseh melacha b'yom hashvi'i Shabbat Shabbaton mikra kodesh kol melacha lo ta'aseh Shabbat hi l'Adonai b'chol moshvahotechem.
Okay, and the next one is on 725, verse 4, and it tells us when to celebrate the Pesach and for how long, and the basic commandment to eat matzah for 7 days.
Ile moadei Adonai mikrai kodesh asher tikru otam b'moadam b'chodesh harishon b'arba'asar l'chodesh ben arba'im Pesach l'Adonai v'chamisha asar yom l'chodesh hazeh chag hamatzot l'Adonai shivat yamim matzot tochelu b'yom harishon mikra kodesh yelachem kom lechet avodah lo ta'asu v'ikravtem mishel Adonai shivat yamim b'yom hashvi'i mikra kodesh kom lechet avodah lo ta'asu.
Okay, and again on page 725, verse 9, and here we see the Omer, the sheaf offering, and when we begin to celebrate that. It's the day after the first day of Passover that we wave the Omer, and in the next aliyah we see how long to count. Until the Omer is begun, one may not eat of the new harvest. So there's a phrase, anything new is forbidden by the Torah. It referred to the grain. That's what it was originally used for. And you couldn't eat it until we first waved the barley grain. There was a ritual to be concluded. But the phrase was co-opted by Orthodox Judaism according to the great Orthodox legalist, the Khatam Sofer, and the phrase anything new is forbidden by the Torah came to mean that reform in halakha was forbidden. Just so you know, the Orthodox also pay homage to the evolution of Jewish law. A little slower than the conservative movement, and the reform movement basically says that halakha has a vote but not a veto. We are now going to read from page 725, verse 9.
Yidaber Adonai al Moshe Moidaber el bnei Yisrael v'mata alehem ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem uketzartem eketzira ve'veitem et omer eshit kitzirchem el hakohen ve'ni v'da omer lifnei Adonai lirtzonchem v'malcharat ha-shabbat yinifenu hakohen v'asitem b'yom hanivchem et ha-omer kevestami menshnato le'olal Adonai v'minchatos ne'esranim Solet bulav Hashemen, Ishel Adonai reach nichoach, V'nizko yain v'itahin, V'lechem v'karli v'charmel, Lo tachlu ad etzem hayom hazeh, Ad aviachem et korban Elohechem, Chugad olam l'dorodechem, B'chal moshvotechem.
Okay. Now, in the last reading from the Torah, is on page 726, starting with verse 15. Here we see how to actually count the Omer. 7 weeks, and then the new grain was to be brought to Jerusalem. 7 weeks, and that's how many days?
49 days.
49 days, right, 49. And the next day is Shavuot, what Christians came to call Pentecost. We then learned about the sacrifice for Shavuot. And once again, we see repeated what we saw last week in Leviticus 19:9, to not reap the corners of the fields that are being harvested, to leave them for the poor and the stranger, and the ger is the stranger. It comes from as a form of punctuation, like the 3 times we see, do not see the calf in his mother's milk, that emphasizes certain things. Seemingly unconnected, but making an ethical statement in the midst of some technicalities. The Eitz Chaim says it's here because it's here that because we're dealing with the harvest. Now, the rest of the calendar is detailed in what we're not going to read. Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Atonement, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, the Lulav and Etrog, and then there is how to prepare olive oil for lamps and flour to bake the showbreads that accompany the animal sacrifice, and some other laws are given, and we see the punishment for blasphemy. That's what happens in this parsha, the part we don't read. So we talked about the blasphemy, and we are now going to read page 726, verse 15.
V'sefartem lachem mimacharad ha-shabbat miyom haviachem et omer hatanufa sheba shabbatot mimot tiyena ahad mimacharad ha-shabbat ha-shvi'it yispru chamishim yom v'ikravtem mincha charasha l'Adonai moshvotechem tavihu lechem tenufa shtayim snei asronim solet tiyena chametz teyafena bikurim l'Adonai v'ikravtem ala lechem Shivat kvasim tmimim b'nei shana uvahar ben bakar echad Belim shtayim yu olal Adonai minchata v'niskayim Yisheviach nichoach Adonai v'asitem zirizim echad l'chatat Shnei kvasim b'nei shana lezavach shlamim V'nif hakohen otam Lechem abikorim tenufa lifnei Adonai Shnei kvasim kodesh yu l'Adonai l'kohen Ukratem be'etzem hayom hazeh, mikra kodesh yelachem komelech davada lo ta'aseh, chukat olam b'chol moshvotechem l'dorotechem, v'kutzrechem et kitzir artzechem lo techaleh, be'ad sadcha b'kutzrecha v'lek et kitzircha lo tilakit, l'ani v'lager tazov otam ani Adonai Elohechem.
And again, introducing an ethical component to the technical business of the priests. Okay, now, the Haftarah, before we get to the Haftarah, we're going to do the Mishabera, and then I'll introduce the Haftarah.
Avotenu mikor haberacha lemotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishi beirachim otenu, mikor habiracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing,
with refuah shlema,
the renewal
of body,
the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
And the Haftarah today is taken from the book of Ezekiel, in one of the later chapters, chapter 44. And here we see the prophet's vision, according to the rabbis, of the third temple, a list of rules and regulation that bears a resemblance to our parsha in the Torah. Some people see the similarities to the rules in Leviticus, and others stress the differences. Some look at both and see the way that conservative Judaism, for example, tries to see the picture that is one of tradition and change. The tradition holds that Ezekiel was a priest, and scholars debate as to whether or not he actually served in the temple before its destruction. And that would account for some of the discrepancies between what he writes and what's in the Torah. The rabbis decided that Ezekiel, considered his other prophecies, must be talking about the next time the temple will be built. So keep that in mind as we go to that. We're on page 735.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'chaim neviim tovim ratzav v'divreihem anemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habacher b'torah v'Moshe avdo v'Yisrael amahu v'nvi'ei haemet v'tzedek.
Amen.
V'kohanim halevim b'nei tzadok asher shamru et mishmeret mikdoshi v'tzivot b'nei Yisrael me'alayhima yikrevu elai l'sharateni v'yamdu levanai v'akriv lichei levidamnu Adonai Elohim heima yavo el mikdashi v'hima yikrevu el shulchani l'sharateni v'shamru et mishmarti v'ayah b'voam el sharei echatzer ha'penimim Bigdei fishtehim yilbashu v'lo yale alehem tzemer b'sharatam b'sharei ha'echatzer ha'penimit v'avaita v'arei fishtehim yiyu arosham michnisei fishtehim yiyu al matnehem lo yachgiru b'yaza uvetzeitam el ha'chatzer ha'chitzonah Elachatzer chitzona elam yivshitu et bigdehem asher hema mishatim v'nichuvotam belishchot hakodesh ve'lavosho bigadim achirim ve'yagdishu et ham b'vigdehem v'rosham yigalechu Uvera lo yishalechu kasomich yichsemuhu edroshechem v'ayin lo yishtuhu kol kolein b'voam elachatzer pnimid v'almana ugrusha lo yichulehem v'nashim ki mitulot mizera b'ed Yisrael v'almana asher tiyeh almana mikolein Yikachu vedami yoru vein kodesh lecho vein tamei letor yodilhum v'yalriv hema yamdu lamishpat b'mishpatai yishpitu v'torotai v'chugadai v'chomadai yishmaru v'chabtotai yikadishu v'elmeid adam v'yavo l'tama ki Im la'avleim levein levaleach v'lachot asher lo haitalish yitamau v'acharei taharato shivat amim yisperu laho v'yohom bo'el hakodesh el hachatzer ha'pnimit v'shareit ba'kodesh יקריב חטאתנו אדוני אלוהים, ויתן להם נחלה אני נחל אדם, ואחוזה לא תיתנו להם ישראל אני אחוזתם. המנחה וחטאת ושממה יאכלם, וכל חרם בישראל להם יהיה. וראשית כל ביקוריכו וכל תרומתכו מכל תרומותיכם לכהנים יהיה. וראשית הריסותיכם תיתנו לכהן להניח ברכה אל ביתך. כל נבלה ודריפה מן העוף ומן הבהמה לא יאכלו הכהנים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם צור כל עולמים צדיק בכל דורות. אלא נאמן האומר ויוסף מדבר בקיים שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ונאמנים דבריך ודבריך מדבריך. אך לא ישוב ריקם כי המלך נאמן ברחמן אתה ברוך אתה אדוני.
Baruch v'baruch shemo.
אלא נאמן בכל דבריו.
Amen.
רחים אז יגהי בין חיינו ולעלו בנפש תושיע במהרה בימינו ברוך אתה
Baruch
אדוני.
v'baruch shemo.
משמח ציון בבניך.
Amen.
שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו וליחנה בעבדיך. ומחלו בדוד משיחך במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו. הכיסא לא יישב זר ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים בכבודו. כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו. שלח בנראה לעולם בעת ברוך אתה אדוני.
Baruch v'baruch shemo.
מגיד דוד.
Amen.
על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה. שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לך והוד ותפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך. מברכים אותך כי ברוך שמך בפי כל חי. תמיד לעולם בעת ברוך אתה אדוני.
Baruch shemo.
מקדש השבת.
Amen. Shkoach.
ברוך תהיה.
We will now get back into our Siddur, and we're going to read the last paragraph on page 148 as a prayer for our country. May this land, under your providence, be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us all say,
Amen.
Lo yisagoy al goy chereb, lo yilmedu od milchama. Lo yisagoy al goy chereb, lo yilmedu od milchama. V'nomar Amen. Makora Chaim, source of all life, we will ask for a quick end to hostilities around the world, domestic and foreign, and the swift and safe return of our young men and women to their homes, and let us all say.
Amen.
And now, on page 149, a prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu shebashamayim, tzor Yisrael v'go'alo, barech medinat Yisrael, reshit smichat gulatenu, hagen eleha be'evrat chastecha, ופרוס עליך סוכת שלומך, ושלח אורך ויעמידך לראשך, שריך ויועציך, ותקנם בעצה טובה מלפניך. חזק את ידי מגיני ארץ קודשנו, והנחילם אלוהינו ישועה ויתרת ניצחון תיאטרם. ונתת שלום בארץ, ושמחת עולם ליושביה, ונאמר, Amen. And I wish Robbie or Mayan or somebody would be here now, but we're looking forward to seeing people in person in the not too distant future as we go from red to orange to yellow. And what comes after yellow? Green?
I don't know.
I don't think it ever gets past yellow. But
The rainbow, I mean.
here we are with Ashrei on page 151.
אשרי ביתך עוד ילדוך סלע.
אשרי העם שככה לו, אשרי העם שאדוני אלוהיו.
תהילה לדוד רבים אלוהי המלך וברך שמך לעולם ועד.
בכל יום אברכך ועלה שמך לעולם ועד.
גדול אדוני מהולה מאוד ולגדולתו אין חקר.
מדור לדור ישבח מעשיך וגבורתך יגידו.
הדר כבוד הודיך ודברי נבלתך עשיך.
ועזוז נורותיך יאמרו גדולתך ספרנה.
זכר רב תבחי אביהו וצדקתך ירננו.
חנון ורחום אדוני ערך אפיים וגדול חסד.
אדוני לכל ברחמיו וכל מעשיו.
יודוך אדוני כל מעשיך וחסידיך יברכוך.
כבוד מלכותך יאמרו גבורתך ידברו.
להודיע לבני האדם גבורותיו וכבוד הדר מלכותו.
מלכותך מלכות כל העולמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
אין יכול לך יסבירו ואתה נותן להם את אוכלם בעתו.
פותח את ידיך ומסביר לכל חי רצון.
צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו וחסיד בכל מעשיו.
קרוב אדוני לכל קורב לכל אשר יקראו באמת.
רצון רע ויעשה וישב אדם ישמע ויושיב.
שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו ואת כל רשעים ישמיד.
תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו וברך ובשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה.
We continue on page 155 with the Chatzi Kaddish that brings the Torah service to an end and ushers us into the Musaf. Amen. Amen. Yeshmei Rabba Mivora Yolam Lo Me'almaya Yitbarach
Yitbarach Vishtabach Vidbar Vidma Vidnase Vid Hadar Vidale Vidalah Shemede Gudejah
Brichu
Yehila Migo Bilachada Vishirada Tushbecha Davinechemata
Amen. We will pray together on page 156b and 157 for the Kedusha, and then we'll pray, finish the Amidah silently from page 158 to 161.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, El Hagadol, Hagiboi v'Hanora, El Elyon, Kom El Chazadim David, V'gonei Hagaho, V'zacher Chasdei Avahot, V'mevigo El Livnei V'neihem, V'mahan Shevo B'Yahava, Melech Chazer Uvokid Moshiach U'Magin, Baruch atah Adonai, Magin Avraham, Uvokid Sarah, Atagi Boy Leolam Adonai, Mechemiti Mahata Rav Hoshia, morid hata, mecha kelchaim bechesed, mechayim edim birachamim rabim, samech navim veravecholim, umadir asurim, umekayim ebunada, lishenei afar, michaba chaba givurot, umida melach, melech memit, umechayim, umazmeach Yeshua, v'demanat alachayot metim, Baruch Atah Adonai,
Baruch Baruch Shema.
Mechei hametim.
Amen. Page 157.
Naharitzecha v'nagrishecha, kisahot siyah, sarvei kodesh, hamagdishim, shimcha b'kodesh, kakadu, ayad neviecha, v'karazel zeviamar, kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzivaot, Melech haaretz kivodo. Kivodam aliolam, Mesharid Shalim Zelazel, Ayimigam kivodo. Hilmazahom Baruch Yomeru,
Baruch Kivodonai Mim Komo.
Mim Komo, Liven Birachamim, V'yachanam Yaham Yacharim Shimo, Erev Alager, Bechayom David, Ahamayim B'Yahava, Shema Omrim, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Moshiachenu, V'hu Yashmeinu, B'rachamav Sheni, Le'einei Kol Chai, Le'olachem Le'elohim.
Ani Adonai Elohechem.
V'divri kol shecha katuv le'mar, Im
Lo
lo Adonai le'olam,
Olam
Melachim
Melech
Tzion,
Tzion
V'dor
V'dor
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Adonai gid golecha, V'nezach nezach b'shadecha nagris, Shivcha Elohim mipinu lo yamus te'olam ba'ed, Ki el melch gadol v'kadosh ata, Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Baruch Shema.
Ha'el HaKadosh.
Amen. 158 to 161. can finish the Musaf and head into our concluding prayers on page 181 with Kaddish Shalem.
You can have a good Shemir Rabba.
Amen.
Bill Money Rock, and I'm looking at the Chod of Israel. Baglav is man Kariv, Yimero.
Amen.
Yesh
May
me
Rabba
Rabba
Mevora, Yolam Lo Meomaya, Barach,
Yipravish Nabach, Yipravin Nomenasek, the David of Al Shabbat, Kudasha.
Brechu.
Ela Mingo Berka Davishivada, Jipaka Nakabata, the Roman Mave Yimero.
Amen.
Tidga Bethel of Israel. Kodam of a Hon Mishmai, Yimeru.
Amen.
Yes, some of them is my Chaim Ali, the Bako Israel, Yimeru.
Amen.
O Shalom Imrama. Uya Shalom Aleinu. V'yalga Yisrael. V'imru. Amen. Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu. V'yalga Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu, Yahweh Israel.
Amen. Page 182, in Kelohenu.
In Kelohenu, in Gadonenu, in Kemalkeinu, in Kemoshienu, Mi Kelohenu, Mi Gadonenu, Mi Kemalkeinu, Mi Kemoshienu. No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Atahu Shekniru, Avoteinu, Lifanecha Getoret Hasamim.
Page 183, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Adon HaKol, Tate Gedula, Yotzer Bereshit, Asana Kagaya Ratso, Kishachot Adama, Sam Chalkenu Kahem, Kichol Amonam, Ukarim, Umishtachlavim, Umodim, Melech Malchei HaMelachim, Baruch Hu, Unotei Shamayim Yotzer Arech, Bashamayim Ima'al, Uzo, Shkina Uzo, Emir Elohim, Eloheinu, Enoch. Emar Adonai Lech al kol haaretz Bayom hahu Yeh Adonai echad Mo echad. Okay. I think we should count the Omer.
Okay.
Okay. So if you want to go to page 55 for the blessing and 58 for the day. The night before last, we had Lag BaOmer. That was the 33rd day of the Omer. So Friday night and today, you have to find the next one. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer.
Amen.
And we go over to, yeah. Hayom arba'ah v'shloshim yom shehem arba'ah shvuot v'shisha yamim la'omer. That's the 44th day of the Omer. That's 4 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. And now, in solemn testimony, before we do the Kaddish, mentioned this last night, but I want to mention it again today. But our hearts go out to all the people who went to Mount Meron to celebrate Lag BaOmer, and the disaster happened that took some 45 or possibly more lives by now. It was not turning my sackcloth into dancing, it was more the other way around. People congregate and gather at the graves of some certain tzaddikim, and this is the one, they were going to the grave of Shimon Bar Yochai, and it's an intercessionary prayer that you ask for the spirit of the saint to be effective and helpful in getting your prayers. A lot of people praying for a mate, a child, or something, but it did not work out well at all, and our hearts go out to all the people who were injured and the families of those who were injured and killed. I want to have just about maybe a few seconds of silence before we go on. In solemn testimony to the unbroken faith which links one generation to the next, those in mourning or observing a yahrzeit now rise to, in one moment we'll rise to praise God's name with the words of the Mourner's Kaddish on page 184. But first, yahrzeits observed this week include Sylvia DePerry, Morris Finkelstein, Justice Franks, Harry Geller, Ben Sreberg, Alvin Jules Weinberg, Morris W. Weisby, Pauline Winter, Sylvia Handler, Erwin E. Jackman, Lionel Kahane, Joseph Moss, Charles Weinberg, Herbert Wussoff, Morris Bernstein, Edith Cohen, Ruth Dvorin, Frida Enton, Myra Kahane, Kolia Sikoff, Anna Siegel, Simon Weintraub, Sarah Dudnik, Esther Lichtman, Louis Mayberg, Celia S. Wedner, Jewel H. Weisbuck, Elsie Cohen, Ida Cohen, Edward Stewart Russell, Frida Goldsman, Kenneth Hirschap, Nathan Heidemann, Nathan Morgenstein, Irving L. November, H. Kelleher Bondar, MD, Salem David Kaplan, Barry Chussard, Ben Etkov, Harriet Guberman, Frida Handler, Edel Rose LeFand, Esther Schaefer, Lillian Silberg, and Leona Slanger. Mourner's Kaddish is on page 184. And for those who need to say Kaddish, now's the time to rise. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
B'olma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kari v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach li'olam ulomei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudsha b'rechu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiron bi'oma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. And now, stay standing, those of you who are standing, and the rest of us are invited to rise as well for Kiddush.
I need to remind Tony to bring me the yayin.
Oh, no.
So why don't I do a Donalam? You can ask him, I'll do Kiddush after that?
Well,
Or should I just wait?
yeah, I think Adonallah means it's over.
Yeah, okay.
So Tony,
Tony, can you hear us?
the wine.
Please.
So how was your week?
My week was fine, Another quick one, in the books.
Yep.
Anyway, we're sorry you have to wait, but we can assure you the Kiddush is well worth it.
Yeah, whatever's in your fridge. Well, we could do the announcements now.
Yeah.
We could do that. We have a couple of things that are coming up. We already had Torah study. Erev Shavuot is Sunday, May 16th, and we will once again join forces with the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County on Zoom for a county-wide study session, the Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Details are to be announced. The TBE office will be closed on Monday of Shavuot and Tuesday of Shavuot, May 6th, 17th and 18th. And Yisker will be on Tuesday, May 18th, around 11 o'clock, maybe a few minutes more, or before that. So, you got them both there?
Yeah. I wanted to do that, in a special ceremonial way,
Yes, well done.
It's like passing the goblet.
Okay, and now rise for Kiddush, and we'll get the rest of the announcements after.
V'shamiru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, L'asod et ha-Shabbat, L'dorot amrit olam, Be'yeni uve'bnei Yisrael oti, Le'olam ki sheshet yamim, Asadonai et ha-shamayim v'et haaretz, U'vayom ha-shvi shavat v'yi nafash, Hakim birach l'nayim ha-Shabbat v'yakadeshehu, Sarvayman Ramadan Rabotai,
L'chaim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen.
Amen. And now, we're going to have the washing of the hands and the prayer over the bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher krishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim.
Amen.
פותח את ידיך ומסביר לך חי רצון ברשות. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם המוציא לחם מן הארץ.
Amen.
Just keeps getting better and better.
Yeah, I know. Vintage is always a good thing.
Okay, now, back to the announcements. We covered Shavuot. Women's League is holding another TBE gift shop sale on Sunday, May the 23rd from 1 to 4 p.m. Enjoy wine and cheese, and the wine will only be served to people who are over 21. And you can enjoy the wine and cheese while you shop, and books from the library will be available. The TBE office will be closed on Monday, May 31st for Memorial Day. And the Misha Barak list was sent out with the email. If you need to take a name off or put a name on the list or return a name that's been taken off, because the list is cleared every 6 weeks or so, please call the office. And that will do it.
Why don't you mention the next couple of weeks what's going on?
Oh, well, in the next couple of weeks, you have a lot of reasons to tune in. I'll be gone for the next 2 weeks, and next week, our good friend Eric Dangott will be pinch hitting. Will be taking over the rabbinical responsibilities, and Zev will be here for that. And then the following week, the 15th of May, neither Zev nor I will be here, but Marcia Tilchin will be running the service that day. So, is there anything else I can sell here?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Adon Olam, page 187.
Adon Olam, Hashem Malach b'terem kol, Yitzin the Ein Asa v'chefso kol, Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra, Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra, v'yacharei kichlo davo levado imloch nora, v'hu haya v'hu hove v'hu yeh b'tifara, v'hu yeh
בתפארה הוא אחד, ואין שני לעם שלו להכבירה, ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז, ולא העוז והמשרה,
והוא
אלי חגואלי וצורך לי ויצרה, ניסי ומנוסי בנגוסי ביום אקרא, ביום אקרא בידו, הפקיד רוחי ביד אישן ויעירה, רוחי גביעתי אדוני לי ולא אירא, אדוני לי ולא אירא. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
And happy May Day.